The sound of my newborn's cries pierced the silence. But what happened next? Karen, in a fit of rage, decided to take matters into her own hands, and what she did next left everyone in shock. A plastic bag, over my baby's head. No one saw it coming, and when the doctor arrived, even he couldn't believe what he was about to witness. Stay tuned, because the truth will leave you speechless. It was supposed to be a peaceful afternoon. The kind of quiet, calm moment that new parents cherish. My newborn daughter, just a few days old, was in her crib, her cries filling the room. As any parent knows, crying is part of the package, something we've all grown accustomed to. But that day, everything changed. Karen, a woman who had already earned a notorious reputation in our neighborhood for her strange and, at times, disturbing behavior, had had enough. She wasn't invited, yet there she was, standing in the doorway of our home, her face twisted in anger. "Make her stop crying," she demanded. It was as if my daughter's innocent sound had become a personal offense to her. I tried to calm Karen down, telling her that babies cry, that it was just part of life, but she wasn't having it. Her irritation turned to frustration, and before I knew what was happening, she had barged into the room. There was no warning, no apology, just the overwhelming pressure to silence my child. The tension in the air was palpable. Then, without any sense of remorse, Karen did the unthinkable. She reached down and placed a plastic bag over my newborn's head. My heart stopped. My blood ran cold. The room felt as though it were closing in on me. How could someone, anyone, be capable of such cruelty? But the worst part? This was just the beginning. What happened next would shock everyone, even the doctor who arrived moments later. And what we discovered would change our lives forever. Karen had always been an unusual character in our neighborhood. She wasn't the typical busybody you'd find at every HOA meeting, nor was she the type of person who volunteered for neighborhood events with a smile. No, Karen had a darker presence, one that seemed to weigh down the air whenever she was around. It wasn't long before her odd behavior became the subject of whispers, the topic of nervous laughter when people thought she wasn't listening. I first met Karen when we moved into the neighborhood a few years ago. At first, she seemed harmless enough, always appearing at the door to greet newcomers with a plastic smile and a casserole dish, her way of being helpful, as she would call it. But something about her always felt off. She had a way of making everything about her. A simple chat about the weather would somehow turn into a rant about the most trivial inconveniences in her life. And when she didn't get the attention she craved, her temper flared, and the pleasant facade would crack, revealing something much more sinister underneath. Over the years, her behavior grew increasingly erratic. She would demand that her neighbors abide by rules that no one had ever heard of. The number of times she'd walked around the neighborhood with her clipboard, checking on things, was enough to give anyone pause. If a yard wasn't manicured to perfection, Karen was there, pen in hand, ready to report it. If she saw a child's bike left on the sidewalk for more than 5 minutes, she'd storm over, glaring at the parents with a disapproving look that could freeze water. But the most unsettling thing about Karen wasn't her obsession with rules, it was her unpredictability. You never knew when she would snap. That morning, everything had been fine. The house was quiet except for the soft gurgle of my newborn daughter in her crib. I had just finished feeding her and was looking forward to a little rest. The house felt warm, a comforting kind of warmth that comes only from having a baby in the home. As I watched her tiny hands flutter in the air, my mind wandered. I thought of all the things I would do to make her life the best it could be. But before I could settle into these thoughts, there was a knock at the door. It was Karen. I hadn't expected her, of course. We weren't particularly close, and I had hoped that she would take her usual stance of maintaining her distance. But there she was, standing at the door, a scowl on her face, a look of urgency in her eyes. She didn't even wait for me to invite her in. Without a word, she marched past me, her heels clicking against the wooden floor. "Your baby," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "She's crying too much. You need to make her stop." I blinked, taken aback. Was this really happening? Was Karen, of all people, telling me how to take care of my own child? The nerve of her. She's a newborn. Karen, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She's going to cry. It's normal. But Karen wasn't having it. She marched straight to the nursery, not even sparing a second to acknowledge my response. Her face was twisted with frustration, her lips set in a hard line. The look in her eyes was almost desperate. It was as if she couldn't stand the sound of my baby's cries, as if it was personally offending her. I followed her, my heart rate quickening with each step. Karen stood in the nursery, her eyes narrowing as she looked at my daughter, who was now fussing in her crib. The cry wasn't one of pain or distress, it was just the sound of a newborn doing what newborns do. But to Karen, it seemed like a signal, a call to action. She turned to face me, her face flushed with anger. She needs to be quiet. You're not being a good mother if you let her disturb the peace. I felt my chest tighten. My baby was crying. Every new mother experiences that feeling, that gut-wrenching pang of helplessness when you can't soothe your baby's discomfort. But Karen wasn't seeing the situation from my perspective. Her obsession with silence, with order, had driven her to the brink of madness. I'll get her to stop crying, don't worry, Karen said in a chilling tone, as if she knew exactly what needed to be done. You'll see. Before I could even react, she reached into her bag and pulled out a plastic bag. The sound of the crinkling plastic filled the room like a warning bell, but I was too stunned to move. Karen, what are you doing? I finally managed to choke out, my voice shaky, but Karen, in her calm, methodical way, didn't answer. Instead, she leaned over the crib, her hands shaking as she carefully placed the plastic bag over my newborn's head. Time seemed to stand still. The world, once vibrant and full of possibilities, felt as though it had been drained of color. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could focus on was the sight of the bag slowly descending over my daughter's face, blocking her ability to cry, to breathe. For a moment, I couldn't process it. My mind fought against the reality of what I was seeing. Was this happening? Was this really Karen, the woman who had been a fixture in our neighborhood, doing something so horrendous? My heart hammered in my chest as I lunged forward. No! Stop! In an instant, the plastic bag was gone. My daughter was gasping for air, her cries now louder than ever. I scooped her up, my hands trembling, and held her against me, trying to calm both my baby and myself. But Karen didn't move. She stood there, frozen, as if what had just happened was completely normal to her. There was no apology, no sign of regret. Just an empty stare. The silence that followed was suffocating. It was only then that I realized I had been holding my breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen, but nothing did. Not until the sound of the doorbell broke the tense stillness. The doctor had arrived. The doorbell rang, slicing through the suffocating silence that had settled over the house. I was still clutching my newborn daughter, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I rocked her back and forth, trying to soothe her cries. My heart was still racing, the terrifying image of the plastic bag hovering over her tiny face burned into my mind. I had never felt so helpless. Karen, however, didn't flinch. She stood there, stiff as a board, her eyes trained on the baby but showing no emotion. It was as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just crossed a line that no one could ever uncross. Her calmness was unnerving, almost chilling. I forced myself to stand, still cradling my daughter in my arms, and moved toward the door. My legs felt weak, as if the weight of the last few minutes had drained all strength from my body. I opened the door, and there, standing in the threshold, was Dr. Harper, the family physician. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice warm and professional, a contrast to the coldness I felt in the pit of my stomach. "How's the baby today?" I couldn't speak. The words lodged in my throat, choked by the disbelief and terror swirling in my mind. All I could do was step aside and let him in, holding my daughter closer to me as if protecting her from everything, including Karen. Dr. Harper stepped into the living room, his eyes scanning the room with the practiced calm of a medical professional. He smiled briefly as he saw the baby, but that smile faded the moment his gaze landed on Karen. There was a pause, a brief moment where he seemed to assess the situation, sensing the tension in the air. "I see we've got a bit of a commotion here," he said, looking from me to Karen, his brow furrowing slightly. Karen didn't seem to notice the subtle shift in the atmosphere. She merely nodded, her arms crossed over her chest, her expression flat. She wouldn't stop crying. Karen explained matter-of-factly, as if what had just happened was nothing out of the ordinary. I did what needed to be done. I put a plastic bag over her head to muffle the sound. Dr. Harper's face immediately changed. The calm demeanor he had walked in with evaporated, replaced by confusion, then concern. He blinked, his eyebrows knitting together as he processed what Karen had just said. "Excuse me? You did what?" His voice, usually so controlled, cracked slightly, revealing just how taken aback he was. I could see the shock in his eyes, the disbelief. He turned his gaze back to me, seeking an explanation. But I couldn't offer him anything, not that would make sense. I was still reeling from the horror of the moment. She covered her head with a plastic bag. I managed to whisper, still holding my daughter tightly against my chest. She said it was to stop the crying. Dr. Harper didn't say anything immediately. Instead, he moved forward with quiet urgency, his medical instincts kicking in as he gently reached for my daughter. I stepped back, giving him room to assess her, my eyes never leaving his hands as he carefully examined her face, her breathing, and her overall condition. At that moment, every second felt like an eternity. I watched as Dr. Harper gently pressed his fingers against my daughter's tiny chest, listening for the rise and fall of her breath. His calm exterior remained intact, but I could see the subtle tension in his movements, the way his eyes darted quickly to her face before moving back to her chest. "She's breathing fine," he said at last, his voice steady but tinged with worry. "There's no sign of immediate harm. But—" He paused, looking at Karen as if searching for some sign of remorse. "What you did could have caused suffocation, Karen. You can't just—" He shook his head, unable to finish the thought. Karen's response was just as unsettling as her actions. "It wasn't going to hurt her," she said, shrugging. "She needed to stop crying, and that was the only way. Sometimes you have to take matters into your own hands." The words hung in the air, each one adding to the mounting tension. I could feel my hands tremble, the weight of the situation sinking in more with every second. I wanted to scream, to yell at Karen for what she had done, but my voice was trapped inside me, buried beneath the heavy blanket of disbelief. Dr. Harper's hands moved over the baby, checking her pulse, ensuring she was stable. His face was tense, but he was still composed, still doing his job. He wasn't angry, at least not yet, but I could see the growing concern in his eyes. He knew how close we had come to losing her, and that realization was something no parent should ever have to endure. "Karen," he said, his voice now more authoritative, "this isn't just a matter of what you think is best. What you did was reckless. You cannot put a plastic bag over a baby's head. You could have suffocated her. The fact that she's okay right now is nothing short of a miracle." Karen's face didn't change. She looked at him with a mix of defiance and indifference, as if she hadn't done anything wrong. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something else, something darker. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't regret. It was cold, unfeeling, as though the very idea of what she had done didn't register as a crime to her. "I don't see why you're making such a big deal of this," she said, her voice almost dismissive. "The baby's fine, isn't she? She stopped crying, and that's what matters. I did what was necessary." Dr. Harper's jaw clenched, and I saw the edges of his professional calm begin to crack. He turned to me, his expression softening, and I could see the sympathy in his eyes. He understood the emotional toll this was taking on me, on us. The shock, the confusion, the overwhelming desire to protect my baby, and the sickening realization that Karen had almost taken that away from me. "Let's just focus on making sure your baby is all right," Dr. Harper said gently, trying to bring some semblance of calm to the situation. "But we need to talk about what happened here, and we need to make sure something like this never happens again." Karen's silence spoke volumes. She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge the severity of her actions. It was as if she truly believed she was justified in doing what she did. And that made my blood run cold. As Dr. Harper continued to check on the baby, I stood there, my mind racing. What kind of person does something like this? What had Karen been thinking? And more importantly, what would happen now? The doctor looked at me again, his face softening with concern. "You're lucky she's okay," he said, the gravity of the situation hanging in his words. "But this is far from over." And I knew then that this was just the beginning of something much worse. The sound of my baby's cries slowly softened as Dr. Harper gently cradled her in his arms, checking her vitals and moving through the motions of a medical examination. But no matter how carefully he handled her, no matter how calm he remained, the shock of what had just happened refused to leave my body. The room felt like it was closing in on me. The walls were too tight, the air too heavy, and my mind was racing in 1,000 different directions. I couldn't help but think of how everything had spiraled out of control. Karen had just walked in, demanding silence, and within moments she had nearly suffocated my daughter, a helpless infant, innocent and unaware of the chaos that was unfolding around her. And I had allowed it. I had let her into our home, into the room with my baby, thinking that it would be fine. The dread was sinking in now, that deep, bone-chilling fear that every parent knows at their core. Had I failed to protect my daughter? Had I been too trusting, too naive? I watched as Dr. Harper methodically checked my daughter, his hands moving with precision, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the storm swirling inside me. He was a professional, doing his job, but I couldn't escape the feeling that we were teetering on the edge of something far worse than any of us could have imagined. The baby was still crying, but it was different now. It wasn't the same helpless cry she'd made earlier. This was the cry of a child who had been shaken, who had felt something wrong. "Her breathing is steady," Dr. Harper said, breaking the silence as he looked at me, his voice low but reassuring. "No signs of suffocation, no marks or bruising around her neck, and her oxygen levels are normal. But I'm going to run a few tests to make sure everything is truly okay." I nodded mutely, barely hearing his words. The weight of the situation was pressing down on me, and I could hardly keep my thoughts together. I had to focus. I had to get control over my emotions, but the doubt gnawed at me. I should have never let Karen in. I should have trusted my instincts when they told me something wasn't right. She had always been a little off, a little too intense, a little too obsessed with controlling everything around her. But I hadn't thought she would cross a line like this. The baby's cries started to subside as Dr. Harper gently laid her down on the changing table, making sure she was comfortable before attaching a pulse oximeter to her tiny finger. His brow furrowed in concentration, and I could see the worry creeping into his eyes as he watched the monitor. Every second felt like a lifetime. My mind replayed the moments over and over, Karen standing there with that plastic bag, the strange calmness in her voice as she explained how she was just trying to help. "How did this happen?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I wasn't even sure if I was asking Dr. Harper or if I was just talking to myself. I needed to understand. I needed to know how something so horrific could have occurred in my own home, with someone I thought I could trust. Dr. Harper looked up from the monitor, his face a mixture of concern and confusion. It's hard to say, honestly. I've never encountered anything quite like this before. People can be very strange in how they react to things, especially when they're under stress. But this is a whole different level. The room was still, the air thick with tension as he finished his examination. He turned to face me, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "I think it's important that we get her checked out further. I'm going to have her undergo a full examination at the clinic. We need to make sure there's no underlying trauma, and we'll want to monitor her closely for the next few days. Even if everything seems fine now, there could be delayed reactions. We don't know what kind of damage could have been done." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Damage? Could something that subtle, that insidious, have caused hidden harm to my daughter? I hadn't even known how to react in the moment. The very thought of it was unbearable. I turned away, my eyes falling on Karen. She was standing near the door, her arms folded across her chest as though she hadn't just put a plastic bag over my daughter's head. She hadn't apologized, not a single word of remorse had escaped her lips. In fact, she seemed to think nothing was wrong at all. Her posture was rigid, almost defiant. It was as if she didn't believe she had done anything wrong. And that was what terrified me the most. She hadn't just hurt my baby. She had done it with such cold indifference, with such casualness, that I couldn't understand how someone could be so detached from their actions. It was as if she had simply thought, I know better than you, and went ahead with what she believed was the right thing to do, no matter the cost. But the cost had been so much higher than she could ever comprehend. Karen finally spoke, her voice steady but tinged with annoyance. I don't understand why you're making such a fuss over this. She's fine. The baby stopped crying, didn't she? Isn't that what matters? I couldn't hold it in anymore. The anger that had been building inside me finally erupted. What matters? You almost killed my daughter. Karen, you don't get to just walk in here and decide what's best for her. You're not the mother. You don't have the right to do this. Her expression didn't change. If anything, she looked more irritated, like she was the one being wronged. I was trying to help. She needed to stop crying. You should be thanking me. It was a punch to the gut. How could someone be so blind to the harm they had caused? How could Karen justify something so dangerous, so insane? My mind was spinning, the world around me shifting as the anger and disbelief made it hard to focus. Dr. Harper, sensing the tension rising, placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Let's focus on the baby right now, he said, trying to calm the situation. We need to make sure she's all right. I'll take care of everything here. I'll arrange for her to get further testing, and we'll follow up with you later today. I nodded, but my heart was still racing. The baby was fine for now, but for how long? What damage had been done to her? And, more importantly, what kind of person was Karen? Could she be allowed to roam free after something like this? Dr. Harper left the room shortly after, assuring me that everything would be taken care of, that they would keep us updated, but I didn't feel reassured. I couldn't shake the fear, the worry that my daughter's life had been permanently altered by something I had failed to stop. I should have trusted my gut when Karen walked in. I should have told her to leave. I should have done something, but I didn't. And now, all I could do was wait. Wait for the tests, wait for the truth, and wait to see if my daughter would be okay. The incident that had occurred in my home, though deeply personal, didn't stay private for long. It wasn't long before the story began to spread through the community like wildfire, fueled by a viral video that would change everything. It started, innocently enough. After Dr. Harper had left, he assured me that everything would be fine and that the baby would be monitored closely for the next few days. The immediate danger had passed, and as much as I wanted to breathe a sigh of relief, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something bigger was brewing. As the hours went by, I found myself glued to my phone, scrolling through messages and news updates that seemed to pop up faster than I could process them. It began with a single post. A local news outlet looking for a story had picked up the incident from an anonymous tip. It wasn't long before the full story of what had happened in my home was shared across various social media platforms, complete with a shocking twist. The video, Dr. Harper, ever the professional, had been recording a part of his visit for his own records, as he often did with sensitive situations. However, when Karen had made her bizarre statement about putting the plastic bag over the baby's head, his emotional response had been caught on camera. He had reacted with such genuine disbelief and shock that it became a focal point of the whole story. His face was frozen in horror, and his voice, a normally calm, professional tone, cracked with emotion as he tried to comprehend what had just occurred. The video quickly went viral, shared across Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. News outlets picked it up, calling it the moment a doctor couldn't hide his disbelief at a mother's actions. The video of Dr. Harper's emotional response became the symbol of everything wrong with the situation. People were moved by the rawness in his voice, the heartbreak he showed as he realized what Karen had done to my newborn. It wasn't just a story about a woman's dangerous actions. It was about a community's collective response to something so fundamentally wrong. The video wasn't just shared. It sparked conversations, debates, and a wave of outrage that swept across the neighborhood. People from all walks of life chimed in, each sharing their thoughts on what had happened. Neighbors, who had previously only known Karen as an eccentric figure in the community, now began to question her every action. The tight-knit neighborhood that had once been cordial and peaceful was now a place of suspicion, confusion, and fear. In the comment sections of the viral video, the reactions poured in. Some expressed their anger at Karen, demanding that she face serious consequences for her actions. Others were appalled by the apparent lack of remorse she had shown when confronted by Dr. Harper. They couldn't understand how someone could justify such a horrific act, let alone be so indifferent to the danger they'd put a child in. "What kind of person does this to a baby?" one commenter wrote, the words dripping with disbelief. "This is beyond messed up. I hope Karen is held accountable for what she did." Another comment stood out, written by a local mother. "I'm a mother myself, and I can't even begin to imagine the terror this poor family felt. My heart breaks for them. This woman needs to be stopped." Then there were the more chilling comments, the ones that hinted at a larger issue. "Karen has always been a little too obsessed with control," one neighbor posted. "I've seen her push her way into people's lives before, but this is a whole new level. I've been uncomfortable around her for years, but I never thought she would do something like this." It wasn't just online comments that had the community buzzing. The story quickly spread to the local coffee shops, grocery stores, and community centers. Conversations began to shift from the weather and school events to the chilling reality of what had happened. People were horrified not just by Karen's actions, but by the fact that no one had seen it coming. Karen had been known for being controlling, for making odd demands, for pushing the boundaries of what was socially acceptable. But nobody ever thought she would take it this far. At the local playground, where parents often gathered to let their children play, whispers filled the air. Mothers and fathers spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting nervously as they exchanged their thoughts on the woman who had nearly suffocated a baby. Some parents had always thought Karen's obsession with rules was a little too extreme, but no one had ever considered the possibility that she might be dangerous. It was like a collective veil had been lifted, and the truth about Karen was out in the open. The reaction from the neighbors ranged from confusion to outright fear. People who had once invited Karen into their homes for coffee now found themselves locking their doors when she came near. They began to wonder how much of her behavior had been a warning sign, how much they had overlooked because they had dismissed her as just another difficult person in the neighborhood. There were even a few posts from parents who had experienced Karen's controlling tendencies firsthand. One father shared an incident where Karen had scolded his children for playing too loudly in their own yard, accusing them of disturbing the peace. Another mother recounted how Karen had scolded her for not properly maintaining her garden, threatening to report her to the HOA. These stories, once brushed off as trivial, now seemed to paint a more troubling picture of the woman at the center of the controversy. Meanwhile, the story continued to unfold in the media, with new updates pouring in every few hours. The police had begun to investigate the incident, and there were rumors that Karen's actions could lead to charges of child endangerment or even attempted assault. The news outlets were on it, interviewing local residents, experts in child psychology, and even the police, all asking the same question. How could someone think that this was acceptable behavior? Through all of this, Karen remained eerily silent. She had no public statements, no social media posts, and no apologies. It was as though she had completely withdrawn from the fallout. She hadn't been seen in public since the incident, and whispers spread about whether she was avoiding the consequences or simply too prideful to admit she had done anything wrong. Despite Karen's silence, the community's response was growing louder. Local authorities were under pressure to take swift action. The hospital where my daughter had been examined received an influx of phone calls from concerned citizens, all asking if the baby was okay and demanding justice for what had happened. Neighbors began gathering in groups to discuss what needed to be done, with some even suggesting that Karen should be banned from the community entirely. But through it all, one thing remained constant: the emotional response to Dr. Harper's viral video. The raw pain and disbelief on his face had become a symbol of everything that was wrong with Karen's actions. People couldn't stop talking about it. They saw in Dr. Harper's reaction not just a doctor doing his job, but a man who understood the weight of what had nearly happened. His emotional outburst had struck a chord with everyone, and in many ways, it was what had kept the story alive, fueling the outrage that was rippling through the neighborhood and beyond. The questions were only just beginning, and Karen's silence only made the storm stronger. People wanted answers, and they wanted them now. The days that followed felt like an endless stretch of time. The physical effects of the incident, the sharp, raw fear that had gripped my chest, had started to fade slightly, but the emotional scars remained. It wasn't just the act itself that haunted me, it was the aftermath. The constant replay of Karen's calm demeanor as she put that plastic bag over my newborn's head, the cold detachment in her eyes. Those were the images that I couldn't escape. They followed me in every quiet moment, in every glance at my daughter's face as she slept peacefully. The trauma had burrowed deep into my soul, and no amount of reassurance from the doctor or the community could erase the weight of what had happened. But there was something else that was shifting. The community had begun to rally around us, offering support in every way they could. In the days after the story went viral, people showed up at our doorstep with flowers, cards, and gifts for the baby. Neighbors who had once barely nodded to us on the street now offered words of comfort, expressing their outrage at what Karen had done. It was heartwarming, but it didn't take away the feeling of violation. It didn't take away the fact that we had been powerless to stop what had almost destroyed our family. The authorities had, predictably, begun to take the situation seriously. Police arrived at our door, investigating the incident, interviewing us for details, and requesting access to the video footage and any medical records. They had already been in touch with Dr. Harper, who had given his full account of what he had witnessed. He had been shaken by the entire experience, and his emotional reaction had only added weight to the case. Karen had been placed under investigation for child endangerment, a serious charge that could result in prison time. But even with this knowledge, a chilling reality began to settle in. Karen wasn't just a neighbor who had gone too far. She was someone whose actions, cold, calculated, and without remorse, had now caught the attention of everyone in town. Her behavior had become a symbol of something darker, and the question of whether she would face real consequences loomed over us like a dark cloud. The legal process, however, was slow. There was no instant resolution. Police conducted interviews with neighbors who had witnessed Karen's erratic behavior in the past, hoping to establish a pattern of behavior that could support the case against her. They combed through old reports and complaints, piecing together a picture of someone who had long been a troubling presence in the community. It became clear that Karen wasn't just a person who had acted out of anger that day. She was someone whose actions had always been tinged with a need for control, an obsessive desire to impose her will on others. The more they uncovered, the more disturbing it became. But as the case slowly moved through the legal system, the emotional toll on my family only deepened. Each new update from the authorities felt like a reminder of the horror we had experienced. Even as the community continued to offer support, and even as Karen's actions were scrutinized, the emotional damage was still there. It wasn't just the fear for my daughter's safety, it was the constant anxiety that I hadn't been able to protect her when it mattered most. I had let my guard down for just a moment, trusted the wrong person, and now I would never be able to forget the image of Karen hovering over my baby with that plastic bag, suffocating the very life from her. One evening, a few days after the police had started their investigation, I found myself sitting in the nursery watching my daughter sleep. She was so small, so fragile, and yet she had already been through so much. I touched her tiny hand, feeling the warmth of her skin against mine, and I couldn't help but feel a deep pang of guilt. What kind of mother was I if I had let something like this happen? The door creaked open behind me, and I turned to see my partner standing in the doorway. His face was drawn, the weight of everything pressing down on him as well. He walked in and sat beside me, pulling me close. He didn't say anything at first. There was nothing to say that could make the situation better. We both knew that, but just having him there, sharing the quiet grief with me, gave me a sense of relief I hadn't realized I needed. "I can't stop thinking about it," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I can't get the image out of my head." He held me tighter. "I know," he said softly. "Neither can I. But we'll get through this. We have to." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that the haunting images in my mind would eventually fade, that the emotional scars would heal. But deep down, I knew that the terror of that moment, the moment Karen had nearly taken my baby from me, would never truly leave. It would linger in the corners of my mind, a permanent reminder of the fragility of life, of how quickly everything could change. Days turned into weeks, and the emotional weight of the situation didn't lighten. Karen, meanwhile, remained conspicuously absent. The once invincible figure who had commanded attention at every neighborhood gathering was now a shadow, barely seen. There were rumors that she was receiving legal counsel, that she was preparing for the upcoming court case. But for now, she had retreated from the public eye, no longer the force she once was. Then, finally, the legal system began to catch up. The charges against Karen were officially filed. She was facing serious charges of child endangerment with the possibility of jail time if convicted. But as the case moved toward trial, something began to shift in the community's attitude. What had once been a collective outrage against Karen's actions now turned into something more personal for those of us directly affected by it. The anger and fear we had felt were slowly replaced by the realization that, while Karen might face justice, the emotional wounds she had inflicted on us would never fully heal. The morning of the court hearing arrived. It was a day that had been marked on the calendar for weeks, the day when we would finally have a chance to see Karen held accountable for what she had done. I dressed my daughter in a simple white dress, something soft and innocent that felt like a small act of defiance against the darkness that had tried to overtake our lives. We sat in the courtroom, the weight of the moment heavy in the air as the lawyers presented their arguments. The prosecutor painted a vivid picture of Karen's recklessness, while Karen's defense tried to argue that her actions were a misguided attempt at helping. The trial dragged on, with emotional testimony from witnesses and medical experts, but I couldn't focus on the legal arguments. What really mattered, was the fact that we were here, standing together as a family, trying to find some semblance of justice in a world that had seemed so unfair. As the proceedings continued, I held my daughter close, never taking my eyes off her face. She was the reason we were fighting, the reason we had endured the storm. She was my everything, and no matter what happened in that courtroom, I knew one thing: I would never stop protecting her. The day of the verdict arrived with a quiet weight in the air. It had been weeks since the courtroom drama had started, and now, the moment we'd been waiting for, the moment we hoped would finally bring some justice, had arrived. The court proceedings had been exhausting. The testimony, the emotional recounting of the horrors we had lived through, and the haunting images of that day had left us all drained. But today, we would finally know if Karen's actions would lead to consequences that might begin to heal the damage she had done. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Family and friends had gathered to witness the end of this chapter, to see justice served. The community that had once looked on in disbelief at what Karen had done now stood united in support of us. It was overwhelming to feel the weight of that collective solidarity. People who had once avoided us now spoke up, now showed that they were on our side. But even as the warmth of that support surrounded us, there was a gnawing feeling that would never go away. No matter what happened in that courtroom, no matter what verdict was handed down, the emotional scars, the deep pain of knowing that someone we had trusted had nearly taken our daughter from us, would never fully heal. The defense attorney had argued that Karen was merely attempting to silence a crying baby, that she had no malicious intent, that her actions, though misguided, didn't warrant such serious consequences. But everyone in the courtroom knew the truth. The truth that was evident in Karen's cold, emotionless demeanor throughout the trial, the truth that was captured in Dr. Harper's viral video, the truth that what she had done was not an accident, not a lapse in judgment, but a deliberate, terrifying act of control, a terrifying moment of indifference to the life of an innocent child. The prosecutor, on the other hand, had made a compelling case. They had shown the pattern of Karen's behavior, the long history of her controlling tendencies, her willingness to take extreme measures to impose her will on others. And most damning of all, they had presented the facts of what she had done to my daughter, a defenseless infant who had been subjected to something so cruel and heartless, something that could have easily ended in tragedy. The evidence was clear, the facts irrefutable. Karen had not only endangered my daughter's life, she had done so with the full knowledge that her actions could have caused irreparable harm. As the judge prepared to announce the verdict, I sat there, holding my daughter close to me. She was now several months old, a little girl who had already been through so much. The weight of the moment felt suffocating. I kept thinking about how far we had come, how far my baby had come. She had survived that horrifying ordeal, and yet the aftermath was something that none of us could escape. We had all been changed by what had happened. The emotional toll had left its mark on each of us in different ways, and no matter what the judge decided, the scars would remain. The judge finally spoke, his voice steady but filled with authority. Karen Lawson, he began, addressing her directly. You stand convicted of child endangerment. The court has reviewed all of the evidence, including the testimony of witnesses, the medical reports, and the statements made by the defendant herself. It is clear that your actions were not just reckless, but an act of deliberate harm. You attempted to silence a baby in a way that put her life in jeopardy, and for that, you must be held accountable. The words hit me like a wave, flooding me with a mixture of relief and sadness. I had wanted to hear this moment. I had wanted to know that Karen would pay for what she had done. But as the judge continued, the reality of the situation began to settle in. The judge's words didn't erase the pain. They didn't bring back the innocence that had been stolen from my daughter. They didn't undo the trauma that we had endured. Karen Lawson, the judge continued, his voice more solemn now. You are hereby sentenced to 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 3 years. This court recognizes that you have shown no remorse for your actions and that your disregard for the safety and well-being of another person, particularly a defenseless child, cannot go unpunished. You will be taken into custody immediately. As the gavel fell, I felt a strange sense of finality. It was over, or so it seemed. Karen's downfall, the consequences of her actions, were now sealed in that courtroom. She would be locked away, her future uncertain, and the safety of our community, my family, would no longer be at risk from her. But as the reality of her convictions settled in, I couldn't shake the sense that there was still something lost. Karen's imprisonment wouldn't undo the fear, the anger, the mistrust that had taken root. And most importantly, it wouldn't erase the deep unspoken wounds that had been left in the wake of her cruelty. The courtroom erupted in a mix of applause and quiet relief. The community, the people who had rallied behind us, now felt a sense of vindication. Justice had been served, but there was no joy in it, no celebration, only the silent acknowledgement that things would never be the same. Karen would pay for what she had done, but we were left to rebuild, to pick up the pieces of our broken sense of security. Outside the courtroom, the atmosphere was different. People came up to us with words of comfort, congratulating us for having the strength to fight back. But I couldn't bring myself to smile. Yes, Karen was going to prison. Yes, we had won, but the damage had already been done. The scars she had left on us, on my daughter, would remain, and there would always be that lingering sadness, that quiet understanding that we had been betrayed by someone we never thought capable of such cruelty. That evening, as we sat at home trying to process everything that had happened, I couldn't help but feel a sense of both relief and emptiness. My daughter slept peacefully in her crib, her tiny hands clutching a soft toy, her face serene in a way that seemed impossible after everything she had been through. I watched her, my heart swelling with love and protectiveness. The world may have been a little bit safer now, but the truth remained, no one should ever have to go through what we had endured. Karen's downfall was not a cause for celebration. It was a somber reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind closed doors. But the real message, the message that I would carry with me forever, was about protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The defenseless, the innocent, and the children who rely on us to keep them safe. We had fought for our daughter, and we had won. But the fight to protect the most vulnerable in our society, that fight would never truly be over. That was the shocking story of how one woman's actions nearly destroyed an innocent life. If you were as outraged as we were, hit that subscribe button and join our community for more emotional stories that demand attention. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. What do you think of Karen's actions? Was this a one-time lapse, or does she pose a serious threat to others around her? We want to hear your opinion. And don't forget to share this video with your friends. Let's get the word out and keep the conversation going. Make sure you stay tuned, because you won't believe what happens next. Your voice matters, and together we can create awareness and stand up for what's right.